Hello and welcome back to the shooting gallery tutorial for Ren'Py part 4, and let's just jump straight back into it, shall we? And for this month there's another generous person who has joined my Patreon, so I just want to say a big thank you for supporting the channel. So in the last part of the tutorial we finished creating the animations for the targets, which is for the idle state as well as the hit state. And in this part we're going to make it possible to be able to shoot a cork bullet from the cork gun to try and hit the targets with. And to do that we're going to create another sprite manager object that is going to be able to manage several cork bullets at the same time on the screen. So to do that we're first of all going to create the image for the cork bullet. So we're going to create a new line in this section where we have all the cork gun variables. And we're going to say cork image is equal to image, and then the path is going to be images cork.png, like so. And then we'll create the transform that is going to make sure that this cork image is going to have the correct size. So we're going to create a new line, and then we're going to say cork transform is equal to transform, and then child is equal to cork image, and zoom is equal to 0.5, like so. And now since the cork bullet is going to be a sprite, we're going to create a list where we can refer to all of the bullets that are active on the screen. So we're going to create a new line, and then we're going to say cork sprites is equal to, and this is going to be an empty list for now. And then we'll create the sprite manager object. So we're going to say cork sm is equal to sprite manager. And for this sprite manager object we're going to use both the update as well as the event functions. So we're going to say update is equal to cork update, and event is equal to cork events, like so. So the first function we're going to create for this sprite manager object is going to be the event function, and as the name suggests, an event function for a sprite manager object is able to detect different events happening in the game, which is specifically user events. So that can be a mouse button click or a button press on the keyboard, for example. So in this case we're going to listen for a mouse button click in order to create a cork bullet that is going to travel towards where the user clicked. So to do that we're going to scroll back up into the init Python block up here. And a good place to create this function can be underneath all of the other code. So at this very last bit right here where we have return 0, we're going to create a few of the lines. And then we'll go inwards once in the indentations, like so. And then we're going to say def cork events. And this function requires 4 arguments in order to work properly. And these are event. So this argument holds the current event that is happening in the game. And then we have x and y, which is the coordinates of the mouse. And then st, which stands for shown time base, and this one represents the amount of seconds that the sprite manager has been shown on the screen. So now inside of this function we're going to go ahead and create a cork bullet whenever the user has clicked with the mouse. And to do that we need to check what the current event type is according to the event object that we have sent in as a parameter to this function. So to do that we're going to say if event dot type is equal to, and to check the event type we're going to refer to the pygame object available in Ren'Py. So for that we're going to say renpy dot pygame underscore stl2 dot, and then in all caps we're going to say mouse button up, like so. So here we're checking if the current event type is mouse button up. And I'm going to leave a link into the description box below where you can read more about the different event types that you can check for. And now inside of this if statement we're going to create another if statement that is going to check which of the buttons on the mouse has been pressed. And in this case we're going to trigger a cork bullet to be created whenever we are pressing the left mouse button. So for that we're going to say if event button is equal to 1. So the left mouse button has the value of 1, the middle mouse button, which is also the scroll button, has the value 2, and the right mouse button has the value 3. So now we're going to add another condition to this if statement, and this condition is going to make sure that a cork bullet cannot be created if the mouse cursor is too far down on the screen, and that is just because it's going to look and work a little bit better for the game. So for that we're going to say and y, which is this y parameter that we have sent into this function and contains the y coordinate of the mouse. And then we're going to say is less than renpy dot get physical size, and then we're going to refer to the height of the window, so we're going to add a 1 instead of the brackets like so, and then we're going to say minus 140. So here we're checking if the mouse cursor on the y-axis is less than the height of the window minus 140 pixels. So as long as the mouse cursor is at least 140 pixels above the bottom of the window, then we can spawn a cork bullet. So now inside of this if statement, we're going to go ahead and create a new cork bullet. And to do that, we're going to make sure that we are appending the cork bullet to the cork sprites list. So for that, we're going to say cork sprites dot append, and then we'll use the cork sprite manager to create a new cork sprite. So we're going to say cork sm dot create, and then we'll pass in the transform object that we created for the cork bullet in the start label. So we're going to say cork transform like so. And now we're going to create some attributes for these sprites that will help us later on when we are going to animate the cork bullet. And we're going to do this the same way as we did before with the target sprites. So we're going to refer to the sprite that was just created by grabbing the last sprite inside of the cork sprites list. So we're going to say cork sprites at the index of -1. And the first attribute we're going to call original size. So we're going to say original size. And this is going to refer to a tuple, which is going to contain the original size of the cork. So we're going to create 2 round brackets, like so. And the size of the cork sprite is 110 pixels wide. But now because the image is twice as large as it should be displayed on the screen, we're going to divide this by 2, like so. And the same with the height. So we're going to say 138 divided by 2, like so. And now we're going to position the cork sprite on the screen. So to do that, we can go ahead and duplicate this line. And then we're going to remove this original size attribute and instead say x, and then is equal to. And to position this cork sprite on the x-axis, we're going to put it wherever the cork gun is. And we're going to make sure that the cork sprite is more aligned in the center of the cork gun. And to do that, we're going to create a calculation that looks like this. Cork gun pause, because this is the variable that we created earlier that is keeping track of where the cork gun is positioned on the screen. And then we're going to grab the x position of the cork gun. So we're going to add 2 square brackets and then a 0 inside of that, like so. And then we're going to say plus cork sprites at the index of -1 to grab the sprite that we just created. And then we're going to refer to the original size of the cork. So we're going to add a dot after that and then say original size. And then we're going to grab the width. So we're going to add a 0 instead of those brackets, like so. So this calculation is going to make sure that the cork sprite is positioned at the very center of the cork gun barrel. And then we'll position it on the y-axis as well. So we're going to duplicate this line. And then we're going to remove all of this and say dot y instead is equal to. And in this case, we're going to position it at the end of the cork gun barrel. So for that, we're simply going to say cork gun pos at the index of 1 to grab the y position of the cork gun. But now since the x and y values of the cork sprite is going to change as we're going to move it and animate it, we want to also be able to know where the original position of the cork sprite is. So for that, we're going to create a new attribute. So we can duplicate this line. And then we're going to remove this and say original pos. And this is going to refer to a tuple. So we're going to add 2 round brackets. And then we're going to refer to the x and y values of the cork sprite. So we're going to say cork sprites at the index of -1 dot x and cork sprites at the index of -1 dot y, like so. And because we're going to animate the cork sprites to scale down as they're moving further away from us, we also need an attribute that is going to keep a track of the zoom factor for the sprite. So we're going to duplicate this line. And then we're going to rename this to zoom. And the original value is going to be 0.5, like so. Now the last attribute we're going to create for these sprites is going to help us to determine the position that the cork sprite should move to. So we can go ahead and duplicate this line. And then we're going to call this attribute move to pause. And this is going to refer to a tuple, so we're going to add 2 brackets, like so. So to position the cork sprite, we're going to refer to the cork gun's X position and then the mouse position on the Y axis. So we're going to say cork gun pause at the index of 0 to grab the X position. And then for the Y position, we're simply going to put Y to refer to the Y parameter of this function, which holds the Y position of the mouse cursor. And now to make sure that the sprites are going to show up on the screen, we need to also make sure that we are redrawing the sprite manager object. So we're going to create a new line, and then we're going to say cork sm.redraw, and then we will add a 0 as a parameter to the redraw method, like so, to make sure that it will not automatically run again after a certain amount of seconds has passed. So now we have finished this Cork Events function, where we are creating a new cork sprite whenever the user is clicking with the mouse. But now we also need to make sure that we can see the sprites on the screen. So for that, we need to make sure that we are adding the Cork Sprite Manager object to the shooting gallery screen. So we're going to scroll back down until we find it, right here. And we're going to add it just underneath the Cork Gun transform. So we're going to create a new line. And then we're going to say add Cork SM, like so. Now before we can go ahead and launch the game, we need to also make sure that we are creating the Cork Update function. Otherwise we're going to get an error as soon as we run the game. And to do that, we can go ahead and create the function underneath this Cork Events function. So we're going to create a few of the lines, and then go inwards until we reach the same indentation as the other function, like so. And then we're going to say def cork update. And this function only takes 1 parameter, which is st. And for now, we can just add a pass statement instead of here, like so, so that we don't have to add any specific code right away now. So now let's go ahead and save our changes and launch the game to see how this looks like. So here, instead of the game again, we're going to go ahead and see if a Cork Bullet is going to spawn whenever we are clicking with the mouse. And as we can see, that does indeed seem to be working, as we're getting new Cork Bullets to spawn every time we click with the mouse. But now if we try to click further down, like here, we can see that nothing is really happening, and that is because of the code that we implemented earlier that is making sure that as long as we're not too far down on the screen, we can create a new bullet. So now that we know that that works, we're going to go back into the code and make sure that these Cork Bullets are animating and moving towards the targets. So let's go ahead and do that now. So now that we are back inside of the code, we're going to go back into this Cork Update function in order to make sure that each of the Cork sprites are moving towards their destination, and we're also going to make sure that we are scaling them down as they are moving further away from us. And to do that, we're going to create a for loop to iterate through each of the Cork sprites in the Cork sprites list. So we're going to remove this pass statement, and then we're going to say for I and cork in enumerate cork sprites, like so. And then inside of this for loop, we're first of all going to create an if statement that is going to check if the cork's Y position is more than the value inside of the move to pause attribute for the current cork in the for loop. So we're going to say if cork dot Y is more than cork dot move to pause, and then 2 square brackets, and then we're going to add a 1 instead of that to grab the Y position that the cork should be moving to. So only if the cork in the current iteration of this for loop has a Y coordinate that is more than the Y coordinate that it should move to, then we can go ahead and move the cork to that position. And to do that, we're going to say cork dot Y and then minus equals to, because what we want to do is to make sure that the cork is moving upwards on the y-axis until it reaches its destination, and the value we're going to put here is going to be a calculation which is going to look like this: abs, and then inside of this abs function we're going to say cork dot move to pause at the index of 1 minus cork dot original pause at the index of 1, and then outside of this abs function we're going to say divided by 15, like so. So with this calculation we are first of all making sure that the cork is moving on the y-axis according to the distance between its original position and the position where it needs to move to. And then we're dividing that value by 15. So by dividing the value by 15, we're making sure that the cork has to move 15 steps until it reaches its destination. So dividing by a smaller value is going to make sure that it's moving faster, and dividing it by a larger value is going to make sure that it's moving slower. And the abs function is a Python function, but it's also available in many other languages. And what it does is it will take whatever value that we have passed into it as a parameter and turn it into an absolute value. And in this case, since we have added a calculation as the parameter, if the calculation is resulting in a negative value, then that value is going to be turned into a positive value by the abs function. And now we're also going to make sure that we are scaling the cork sprite as it's moving further away from us towards its destination. And to do that, we're going to create a new transform. So we're going to create a new line. And then we're going to say t is equal to transform, and then child is equal to, and now we're going to refer to the cork image variable that we have created earlier in the start label that is referencing the correct image that we should use. So we're going to say cork image, and then we'll create a new line. So now in order to make sure that the cork sprite is scaling down every time this function runs, we're going to have to subtract a specific amount from the zoom property of the cork sprite. And then we're going to supply that value to the zoom property of the transform. And the reason why we're not directly subtracting the value from the zoom property of the transform is because that value is not going to be saved for the next time that we run the function. So that is going to cause the transform to keep using the same value over and over again and not really change its appearance. So to make this work, we are going to subtract a specific amount from the zoom property of the cork sprite and then supply that value to the zoom property of the cork transform. So we're going to say cork.zoom minus equal to, and the amount that we're going to scale it down by every time this function runs is going to be 0.023, like so. And this is of course a very small amount, but since this function is going to run every millisecond, it's going to scale down pretty fast anyways. So now because we are scaling the cork sprite down, the movement of the cork on the x-axis is also going to change. So instead of scaling down and moving in a straight line upwards, it's going to want to shift a little bit to the left every time it moves. And that is because its anchor point is at the very top left corner. So to account for that, we need to make sure that we are moving the cork sprite on the x-axis a little bit to the right as well. So we're going to create a new line, and then we're going to say cork.x plus equals to 1.2, like so. And the way I determined this value was by pure experimentation to see what would make the cork move in a straight line. And you can of course experiment with this value to see what you think works best. And now we also need to make sure that we are updating the original size attribute for the cork in the current for loop so that it reflects the new size after we have scaled it down. So to do that, we're going to create a new line, and then we're going to say cork.original size is equal to, and then 2 brackets, like so. And now to determine the new width and height of the cork, we're going to create some calculations. So the first calculation that is going to determine the new width is going to look like this. Cork.original size at the index of 0 to grab the width times cork.zoom, like so. So we're going to multiply the width and the height by the zoom factor in order to get the new size. And then we'll add a comma and add the height as well. So we're going to say cork.original size, and then we're going to grab the height, so we're going to add a 1 instead of those 2 brackets, and then times cork.zoom, like so. Now the name for this attribute, original size, might not be the best name for this attribute, as it kind of sounds like we're saying that it refers to a value that represents the original size instead of just the size of the cork that it can be at any time. So a better name for the attribute should really be just size. But since we have already named it this, we're just going to keep it as it is. But that is just something that you can think about when you are developing your own game. So now we're going to go ahead and set the zoom property for the transform to the value that we have set here to the zoom attribute of the current cork in the for loop. So we're going to create a new line, and then we're going to say t.zoom is equal to cork.zoom, like so. And then we need to make sure that we are calling the update method for the transform in order for this to work properly. So we're going to create a new line, and then we will say t.update, like so. And then lastly, we're going to make sure that we are adding this new transform to the cork sprite. So we're going to create a new line, And then we'll say cork.setChild, and then we will pass in the transform as the parameter, like so. And the last thing we're going to do for now with this function is to add a return statement, just as we have done before with the target update function. So we're going to create a few empty lines underneath here, and then we're going to go inwards 2 times in the indentations, so 1, 2, like so. And then we're going to say return 0, like so. So now let's go ahead and save our changes and launch the game to see what this looks like. So here, back inside of the game again, we're going to go ahead and click with the mouse to see if the cork bullet that is going to be spawned is going to travel towards where we clicked. And as we can see, that does seem to work indeed, as the cork bullet is both traveling towards where we clicked and getting smaller as it's moving away from us. So now that we know that that is working, we're going to go back into the code and implement some more things. So the next thing we're going to do is to make sure that a target can be hit with a cork bullet. But before we go ahead and do that, we're just going to modify this for loop just a little bit. So in this case, we don't really need to keep a track of the current iteration of the for loop by enumerating the cork sprites list. So we can actually go ahead and remove that, like so. And then we're going to remove this other variable, like so. So now it just says for cork in cork sprites. And now we're going to create an else statement that is going to evaluate the true as long as the cork in the current iteration of the for loop has reached its destination. So as long as this if statement is false, then this else statement is going to run, and we're going to check if the cork bullet has hit a target. So we're going to create a new line underneath here, and then go inwards once in the indentations, like so. And then we're going to say else. And then here we're going to create a new for loop, which is going to iterate through all of the target sprites inside of the target sprites list. And then we're going to check for each of those sprites if the cork bullet happens to overlap one of them. So to do that, we're going to say for target in target sprites. And in this case, we're actually going to need to enumerate the target sprites list so that we can have a value that represents the current iteration of the for loop. So we're going to say enumerate, like so. And then we're going to add an extra variable, which we can call I, like so. So now inside of this for loop, we are first of all going to need to check which row that the current target in the for loop is on, because different rows of targets are going to give different amount of points as we hit them with the cork gun. So first of all, we're going to say if target.row is equal to 1. So if the current target in the for loop is on the first row, then we're going to check if the cork bullet is overlapping that target's bounding box. So now in order to check if the target has been hit with the cork bullet, we first of all need to check if the current frame of the target is the first one, because we only want to allow the target to be hit if it's completely up. So to do that, we're going to say if target.current frame is equal to 1, like so. And now we're going to create some more conditions for this if statement that is going to check if the cork bullet is overlapping the target on the x and on the y axis. So we're going to start with the x axis. So we're going to say and target.x is less or equal to a set of brackets cork.x minus cork.original size, and then we're going to grab the width. So we're going to add a 0 instead of these 2 square brackets, like so. And then we're going to say divided by 2. And then outside of these brackets, we're going to say is less or equal to another set of brackets. And then target.x plus target sizes. And then we're going to grab a target size on the top row. So we're going to add 2 quotation marks and then say top, like so. And then we're going to grab the width, so we're going to add 2 extra square brackets and then add a 0 instead of that, like so. So how does this actually work? Well, we are first of all determining the center point of the cork on the x-axis with this calculation right here. And we're doing that by taking the cork's x position and subtracting the cork's width divided by 2. And then we're taking that resulting coordinate and checking if that is more or equal to the target's x position. So if this condition right here is true, then that means that the cork is further to the right on the x-axis than the target is. And then for the second condition, we're checking if the center point of the cork on the x-axis is less or equal to the right side of the target's bounding box. So if this condition is true, then that means that the target is not further to the right than the ending point of the target's bounding box. So if both of these conditions are true, then that means that the cork must be inside of the target's bounding box on the x-axis. And now we're also going to check for the y-axis. So we're going to do something similar. So we're going to say and target dot y is less or equal to, and then a set of brackets. And then instead of that, we're going to say cork dot y minus cork dot original size. And then we're going to grab the height of the cork sprite. So we're going to add a 1 instead of those brackets, like so. And then we're going to say divided by 2. And then instead of those brackets, we're going to say is less or equal to another set of brackets. And then target dot y plus target sizes. And then we're going to grab the height of a top row target. So we're going to add 2 quotation marks and then say top, like so. And then we're going to add another set of brackets and add a 1 instead of that, like so. So now we're checking on both the x-axis and on the y-axis if the cork is overlapping the target. And now inside of this if statement, we are first of all going to make sure that we are marking the target as hit. So we're going to say target dot hit is equal to true. And this is going to make sure that the target is going to play its hit animation inside of the target update function. And now we want to introduce a new variable to our game that is going to keep a track of the user's score, because at this point we want to add a specific amount of points to the user's score as they have hit a target on the top row. So for that, we're going to scroll back down into the start label, and then we're going to create a few empty lines underneath this target variables section. And then we can create a new comment, and we're going to say other variables, like so. And for this variable, we can call it score, and it should be set to 0 as a default value. And then we'll scroll back up into our function right here. And now we're going to add a specific amount of points to the score. So for that, we're going to say score plus equals to 5, for example. But now, since we're making changes to this variable inside of this function, we also need to make sure that we are making it into a global. So we're going to create a new line up here, and then we're going to say global score, like so. And now to make sure that the target is going to play its hit animation as we have marked it as hit right here, we're going to have to make sure that we are triggering the update function to run. And to do that, we're going to call the redraw method of the sprite manager object. So we're going to say target underscore sm dot redraw. And then we're going to add a 0 inside of those 2 brackets, like so. And then we want to make sure that we are removing the cork from the game as it has been used up. So we're going to create a new line, and then we're going to say cork.destroy, like so. So now we also need to make sure that we are removing the correct cork sprite from the cork sprites list. And for that, we're going to say cork sprites dot remove, and then we're going to supply the value that we want to remove from the cork sprites list, which is going to be cork, like so. And then we also need to restart the interaction in order for these changes to take place. So we're going to say Ren'Py dot restart interaction. And I will leave a link into the description box below where you can read more about the restart interaction function. And now the last thing we're going to add for this if statement is going to be a break statement, which is going to make sure that we are breaking out of this for loop, which is iterating through each of the target sprites. So we're going to say break, like so. And now we want to make sure that we are removing the current cork bullet from this for loop right here, as long as we haven't found a target that the cork bullet is overlapping on the first row. And to do that, we're going to create a new line underneath here, and then go inwards once in the indentations, like so. And then we're going to say elif I is equal to len target sprites and then -1, like so. So as long as the current iteration of this for loop right here is the length of the target sprites -1, that we know that we have finished iterating through all of the target sprites in this for loop. So now we're going to make sure that we are removing the current cork in the for loop, and to do that we can simply copy paste these 2 lines right here, like so. So now we want to make sure that we are checking for the second row as well. So as long as a cork bullet is not overlapping a target on the first row, then we want to check for the second row instead. And to do that we can go ahead and copy paste this whole section just underneath, and just make extra sure that you are pasting this in the same indentation as this other if statement, so right here. And then we're going to rename this to say elif, and since we're going to check for the second row, we're going to remove the 1 and say 2 instead, like so. And now for the conditions inside of this if statement, we're going to make sure that we're grabbing a target size on the middle row instead of the top row. So we're going to change this top to say middle, and the same here, like so. And then for the score, instead of adding 5 points when the user has hit a target on the middle row, we're going to add 10 points instead. So we're going to say 10, like so. And now we'll do the last row as well. So we can copy paste this else if statement right here, underneath here, like so. And then we'll change the 2 right here to say 3 instead. And then we'll change all of the middle to say bottom, like so. And then instead of having 10 points for a target on the bottom row, we're going to say 15, like so. So now that we've done that, we're going to go ahead and save our changes and launch the game to see what this looks like. So now that we are back inside of the game again, we are going to see what happens if we try to hit a target with the cork gun. And as we can see, that does seem to work indeed, as when we have hit a target, the target is animating its hit animation. And we can also tell that when we have shot a bullet, that the bullet is disappearing once it has reached its destination. But another thing that we can also tell is that if we try to hit a target just outside of its opaque pixels, then that is also counted as a hit. And that is just because the actual image file of the target contains both the opaque pixels, which makes up the actual shape of the target, as well as the transparent pixels, which makes up the empty space. So in our collision detection, we are checking if the cork bullet is overlapping the bounding box of the target, which includes both the opaque pixels and the transparent pixels. And that is not generally, in my opinion, a very big problem for a game like this. Since the targets are not really that big inside of a game, it's rather a good idea to have a little bit of extra space around the targets to count as a hit for our collision detection. However, for this tutorial, we can still crop out some of the top row targets bounding boxes by removing the bottom portion, which depicts the stick of the target, and just leave the top part for the collision detection. So let's go ahead and go back into the code and implement that now. So back inside of the code again, we're going to go ahead and remove some of the bottom portion of the collision boxes of the top row of targets, so right here. And we're going to do that by removing a certain amount of pixels from this calculation right here. So for that we're going to say minus 30, like so. So that means that we are removing 30 pixels from the height of the collision boxes of the top row of targets. And you can of course experiment with this value to see what you think works best for your game. And you can of course do this with the other calculations in these if statements as well. So if you, for example, want to remove some of the width of the collision boxes from the left or the right side, then you want to subtract a certain amount of pixels from this portion of the condition, or from this calculation right here. So if you do it on this portion, then you're going to remove some of the collision box on the left side, and if you do it on this part, then you're going to remove some of the right side of the collision box. But for this tutorial, we're going to leave it as it is now. So let's go ahead and save our changes and launch the game to see what this looks like. So now we're going to go ahead and try to hit the top row of targets, but only on the very bottom part where the stick is. So let's see what happens. And as we can see, the code that we just implemented does seem to work indeed, as the targets are not flipping back down when we hit only the stick portion. But if we hit further up, like so, we can see that it still works. And I highly recommend that you experiment with the calculations inside of these if statements by either adding or subtracting a certain amount of pixels from the bounding boxes. And then you want to launch the game often to test these bounding boxes to see how they work for your game. But that is going to be it for this video. So in the next part, we are going to continue by adding the score text to the screen as well as a countdown timer. So I thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you in the next video.